Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that's all fun and games until someone gets hit in the eye. My name is Christy Powell. Tonight's guest is a licensed professional with all the best toys. Welcome LPC and play therapist, Ashley Hogan.
Hi, everyone. Like Christy said, my name is Ashley. I'm a therapist in Austin, Texas. I have background working in foster care, suicide and crisis. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I don't really know what else to say.
Super excited to have you. This is a conversation that I feel like has been a little bit overdue because I tell people all the time that sex is really just a form of play. And tonight we're actually getting into it because tonight we are taking a trolley into the wonderful world of make-believe. So I'm hoping folks will give us a call with their stories and questions. We're at 512-991-9242, or you can visit tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now.
I love that it's specifically a trolley that we're on right now.
All right. Well, actually, you and I have worked together and known each other for years. But for the audience to get to know you, let's start with what's got you hot under the collar right now. What's got you turned on this week?
Matt Smith from House of the Dragon.
Uh-huh.
I was not going to watch the show. I'd really put it off because the two writers that shall not be named.
We all remember the great tragedy that was.
So I decided to watch it and was not like a Doctor Who fan, so Matt Smith was not on my radar.
You know, I was going to ask, like, have we as a culture decided that it's Matt Smith from House of the Dragon, or is that still pending?
I'm going to say so. I was never a Doctor Who fan. No offense to anybody who is.
Yeah, I think you just alienated our entire audience, but
so
it's okay.
Sorry,
we'll power
everyone.
Through. Trust me, everybody, she has good information for us.
But him in like his like little wig, and I'm kind of wanting like a niece and an uncle to do it, which I was not anticipating when I started watching it.
Yeah. Fair to say, I like you have been avoiding the show. I heard decent reviews, and so I'm kind of skeptical, but I think I might check it out. So thank you for the endorsement. I'm also watching something that is maybe not sexy, but I think it really has me kind of fired up in a lot of ways. The season 2 of The Vow just came out, or is starting to come out on HBO Max. And they are diving into NXIVM, the sex cult. And, you know, as a gender and sexuality / religious trauma therapist, absolute catnip for me as a program. But honestly, I find it really, really powerful because even though we are talking about this crazy sex cult, which is, you know, obviously sort of a oversimplified way of looking at the actual abuse and everything that happened in that organization, everything that they say about this cult, quote unquote, I think mirrors people's experiences with really any form of religion. And so watching these real life people go through these complicated experiences of, yes, I was abused and taken advantage of, but also this is a multi-level marketing scheme. And I had people below me who I intentionally, unintentionally, wittingly, unwittingly perpetuated that abuse against. And watching folks just kind of reconcile with all of that has been absolutely captivating for me. I think a little bit healing. And I really encourage anybody who is maybe at a place where they're ready to take another step in healing from religious trauma. I'll say for me, it's been very challenging to watch. So I'll encourage people to just be mindful of sort of their own hearts and minds and how comfortable they are with diving into that territory. But man, is it like must-see TV at the same time. So I definitely encourage people to check it out.
When you first said The Vow, I was thinking of the Nicholas Sparks movie. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, okay, so slightly different arrangement.
Yeah,
No
a little bit
question.
different than the Channing Tatum, Rachel McAdams cinematic masterpiece.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's jump into this conversation because, like I said, this is a major talking point for me to constantly be reminding people that sex is not something that we need to think of as like hot and steamy, sexy sex. I mean, yeah, it can be that, but really, I mean, we're just taking like big pieces of meat and slapping them against each other. And if that is not inherently silly and weird and funny and playful, I don't know what is. So I'm excited to look at that idea of play, not just in our sexuality, but in our relationships and the way that we relate to our romantic partners, to our friends, to our community. And so I'm excited to dig in.
That made me, when you said that, like, sex is just two pieces of meat slapping together. I don't know why I'm having all these movie references, but then it made me think of what Alan Rickman said in Dogma about like the faces you people make during sex.
Uh-huh.
Hilarious or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is accurate.
Mm-hmm. Well, so as a therapist, you often work with children. You often use tools like sand tray and other forms of therapeutic play. I mean, can you walk us through what any of that means?
Yeah, so a big part of it is, like, specifically with sand tray, if nobody's familiar with that, and the way that I explain it, it sounds hokey, but it can be really powerful.
Sure.
Like, so there's a sand tray, and every therapist has like miniatures that they would use,
Mm-hmm.
and there's different categories like fantasy, home, people, death and grief. Animals are a big one too. Animals that are like safe, like cats and dogs, or animals that are dangerous, like a T-Rex or a tiger or something like that. And the miniatures are used in the tray as a metaphor. So you can start with the session either of being like, create a world in the sand and let the client do what they will with that prompt. Or prompts I've used in the past, like depending on where a client is at or who or what the like we're specifically working on in session that I think would be helpful. One I've used before is like creating a line in the sand, and like one part of the tray is what does it mean to belong, and then the other side of the tray is like what does it mean to not belong. And part of like processing that in session would be like, who does this figure represent? Which one is you? Tell me a little bit more about what this means, and like how can we like bring all of these figures together. One that is both powerful and dangerous is where you you ask the client to pick figurines that all represent like the immediate members of your family and you. Place yourself in the tray and then place the figures in proximity to how close you are to them. And that one's super fun because you can see like whose mommy and daddy issues are coming out, and it's very telling of like if someone picks like a snake for their mom, like what is the meaning behind that? Tell me a little bit more. And it's a way of like externalizing like your feelings, because it can be really hard to like talk about this stuff, especially if I'm seeing like a teenager who doesn't want to talk about anything.
Right.
And it's a way of like othering ourselves from like the issue that we're talking about, because like we're not talking
Getting some
about
distance.
Yeah, we're not talking about your mom, we're talking about the snake.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's probably a big part of the play in play therapy is creating that almost like gamification and forcing there to be a little bit of space between you and the maybe challenging material you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's creating like a safe place to like act out those things that like not able to like act out in real life. And it looks different than like what traditional therapy looks like. So it really is like for a person who can really like dig into those metaphors. So someone who's really literal may not get as much out of it, which is totally fine. Not not every type of therapy is for everyone.
Sure.
But for me personally, like I really love metaphors, and like it's a way of, like I've done trays like where I've cried,
Mm-hmm.
because like so much came out of it that I was not anticipating.
Yeah. Well, so just that notion of play, how do we define it? I mean, what is play? What constitutes play? What's play useful for? Is it just another word for recreation, or is there more to it than that?
What is play? How play? Man, what an existential question. And I think that it's also like defined by like each like individual person of like what play means to them.
Sure.
And like itself of like being playful like requires like a certain level of vulnerability that I think gets lost like as we get older. Like when we're kids, like I'm thinking, 3 to 7 or 8, like being on the playground and pretending that the sand is lava, or pretending that like like when you're in the pool, like you're playing like sharks and minnows,
Mm-hmm.
or look, I'm a mermaid.
Yeah,
Like,
we're too, I don't want to say too dumb, but like it hasn't occurred to us to be defensive or to be afraid all the
yeah,
time.
like it doesn't occur to us to like be self-conscious. But then like as we get older and children become more aware of like certain differences in people,
Mm-hmm.
like, and especially like the insecurity and like self-consciousness that's inherent of like being a teenager, that oh, I'm not gonna watch like cartoons because that's kid stuff, or I'm not gonna like collect action figures anymore because like I'm too grown up for that, like I can't be playing with that.
Oh, super guilty. I remember specifically being at a Blockbuster video and having my mom see the
Rip.
movie I had picked out for myself and be like, "Aren't you a little too old for this?" And I
Yes.
never, ever forgot it. Like I did not
No.
watch another cartoon for like 15 years.
Yes, like I remember when I found out that Santa wasn't real, and it was because I was in 4th grade and my parents thought like I was too old to like believe in Santa anymore,
Mm.
and I remember being like, Santa's not real. And it was I was devastated, like, because like it lost that like magic in the world of like there's just like something that like other that like could be out there that like has this inherent sense of playfulness. And yeah, I think like when we're like adults, especially like early 20s, when we're trying to figure out like what is adult, how adult,
Mhm.
like when we think of being adults, like we think of like being serious and like we're paying bills and we're doing taxes, and like that inherently in itself like doesn't feel playful.
Yeah. Yeah, so I take it that as we get older, we do become a little more self-aware, maybe a little overly self-conscious, and kind of lose some of that magic. And then as a result, play tends to take up less and less of our time, at least in the ways that we usually think of it. I mean, do you believe that that's true? Do you think that
Yeah.
watching TV or going to see a play at the theater, is that play?
I mean, it can be. I think it also depends on like how you're engaging with the media. Like it makes me think of like fandoms, for example. Like,
Mhm.
um,
If you're in a
like
shit posting group, like that's a form of goofing off. That's a
yes,
form of play.
yes, or like it makes me think of like whenever I was younger and I was so into Harry Potter and Twilight, right? Like I was going to the book releases, I was going to the midnight releases. Like I was like so engrossed in like this media, and like I just had this like teenage obsession with it. And like I missed that feeling, and like like in like the last 5 years I've rediscovered it with Taylor Swift, and I don't care if anybody thinks that's cringe, which like is
Uh-huh.
the thing that like I didn't realize when I hit 30, that like I just would not care. I don't care. I enjoy it, and like that's what matters. And I think that can be like the same thing like with fandom culture of like if you're like just watching a Marvel show, I don't know if inherently of itself can be playful, but like if you're engaging with like forums or with your friends, or if we're really into like cosplay, like that itself is like can be like a form of play.
Yeah, so a important piece of it is just that guilelessness, like a willingness to be silly, to be kind of messy or even cringy.
Yeah, like cringe is like the word that gets thrown around now of like, oh, like I don't want to be cringe. When
Hmm.
like we're all cringe sometime. Nobody is ever
Just embrace it.
just embrace the cringe because like it just doesn't fucking matter. We're all on like a spinning rock. Like, who cares? And I think like that's hopefully like as like you get older and like discover that like there's just some stuff that just does not matter,
Hmm.
that like being able to like re-engage with those things that you did when you were younger, that like you get like this sense of like wonder and obsession, and it's just fun to like do these things, and like there's not a point to it other than like I just like it.
Yeah. Well, so how vital is any of this? I mean, what can you tell us about maybe the need for play for adults?
Existential dread, I think that's the main thing.
Yeah,
Like,
it's the anecdote. Yeah.
yeah, and like especially with like a lot of my clients, like I see plenty of millennials.
Mm.
Like millennials themselves have like been through so many different like unprecedented events that I'm tired of experiencing. Um and I think there is like this like heaviness that can sometimes come with that of like, what's the point? I was grown up telling I can do whatever I want to do. I should major in whatever I major in. Love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. But also on the other side of that, like we've been in like several economic recessions. Um and coming out on the other side of college or grad school or law school or med school or whatever and being like, this isn't what I thought it would be. And like, what's the point? And I think like that's often like a big question that like I get like with like my older adult clients that are going through an existential crisis of like, what is the point? And the thing that I tell a lot of my clients, I can't answer that for you. I
Sure.
wish that I
Yeah.
could, because everyone has their own point. But I
Yeah.
think the
Meaning
way
is
to,
constructed, right? Like
yes,
nobody can create it or hand it to you.
yeah, and a way to like find some sort of point is like there are still good things to enjoy in the world. Like the world sucks so much of the time, and if you're always engaging with like shitty news, like that's what you're going to feel.
Hmm.
But if it's like there's still cats I haven't petted, there's still dogs I haven't met, there's still books that I haven't read yet, there's still 20 billion Marvel movies that are about to come out. Like there's still so many things I haven't done yet, and that like I can still like find joy in these things that make life feel bearable on the days
Mm-hmm.
that it sucks.
Well, so if nobody can tell you how to play or what play looks like, can you give us some guidelines? I mean, just a vague sense of what we might be deficient in or what we might need more of in our life. What does vitamin play look like at the grocery store?
I think like if you're an adult and you're in this place of like I don't have like joy in my life and I don't know what that would look like, I think it's going back to like thinking about like what did you enjoy like as a kid? Like what were the things that like, you know, we'll start with like when you're saying like the grocery store, like what was a food that you had as a kid that you just fucking loved, and like every time you had it you were like, this is the shit. Like recently I bought Gushers and a fruit
Sure.
roll-ups.
Yeah.
um I will say sometimes it doesn't hit the same, but when it does hit the same you're like, ugh,
Yeah.
like this just like it just brings back this like good feeling. Or like chocolate milk, like I can fuck up some chocolate milk. Like, and that's something of like as adults of like, oh, like my
Right.
lactose
Yeah, no,
intolerant.
it's too childish.
Oh,
Yeah.
I shouldn't be drinking that. When it's like the best part about being an adult is like I can have ice cream for dinner and nobody is telling me that like I can't. Like that's the best part about becoming an adult is I can do whatever the hell that I want. There's not like a certain parameter of things that I have to do. Like, I mean, like besides like life responsibility stuff of paying your bills or whatever.
Yeah.
But like thinking of like what are the things that I used to enjoy that like I've since not, and like how is something that I can re-engage with that, and doing it with like just curiosity. Like just being curious about what your feelings are around it. How does it make you feel? And if it doesn't make you feel some kind of way, that's fine. There's no judgment around that, and it's just trying to find something else that can fulfill that part of you. And I think going back to like what you enjoyed as a child can be like a good place to start.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, so you're describing something that is about maybe not even confidence so much as just a lack of judgment, right? And
Mhm.
embracing some curiosity and that guilelessness. What can you say about sex as a form of play? Because, obviously we live in this culture where we're told over and over again that sex is for making babies, for fulfilling wifely duties. It is supposed to be hot and heavy and sexy. And I feel like that playful aspect, that notion of just being non-judgmental and curious and willing to kind of do something goofy and see what feels right gets lost. I
Mhm.
mean, do you think it's valid to see sex primarily as a form of play?
Yeah, well, and I also think it depends on like the context of like the relationship of the person that you're having sex with, right? Like if you're in like a long-term partnership, like engaging in play with your sex life is one like I think is what's going to help like prolong like the fun of it.
Sure.
And it also like it helps you go deeper with your partner because there's vulnerability in play and there's vulnerability in sex. Like you need to be able to like feel like you can fart during sex with your partner and like you're
Yeah.
just gonna laugh it off because we are all human meat sacks and
I mean,
there's just
literally be naked, like just
yes,
allow bodies to be bodies and not
yes,
obsess over whether the sex that you're having looks like, a music video or looks like pornography or
yeah,
whether you're impressing somebody.
yeah. And I think like that is like one of the big parts about it, especially with like the more internet generation is like people getting introduced to pornography like really young and like that, especially if you grow up in Texas, like sex isn't really talked about in like the same way as it might be in other places. And there's not that conversation of like pornography is fantasy. That doesn't make it bad. It just makes it different. And that
Hmm.
like sex isn't always going to look like that. And it probably shouldn't.
Yeah, it's
And
going to be weird. There are going to
yeah,
be noises and odors and
yeah. You're not
sensations.
going to have like a full camera and sound crew. You're not going to have like
Yeah,
a
right.
fluffer. You're not going to have like all of these like crazy toys and things that you've got going on. Like it's going to look different.
Hmm.
And like I think that's an important part of like being able to be vulnerable is like I'm not going to look like a movie star during that, and that's not what like it should be about. It should
Yeah.
just be about enjoying the experience, not trying to look outside of yourself of like, okay, am I turned the right way? Is my belly look weird? Is my double chin showing because I'm on top? Like because at the end of the day, like what should matter is like you're having a good time and your partner is making you feel good
Yeah.
emotionally, physically,
No,
whatever.
I think that this is critical. I mean, we've done episodes where we've talked about sort of the mindfulness of sex and the importance of just paying attention to the most important thing and not getting distracted by all of these different pieces. And I feel like, especially when folks have had a really oppressed sex life, they've gone through like really stringent religious experiences, and then maybe they find themselves in their 20s or their 30s and they feel like they're behind all of their
Mhm.
peers. Everybody else has had sex already, or everybody else has had, a higher body count and all of these notions. And then we feel as if we are meant to perform and be hot, domly
Mhm.
dom, rah, rah kind of sex. And we forget that we're just people. I mean, really, we're all just like unhairy apes in fancy coats banging our genitals against one another, trying to have a good time.
I mean, that is the basis.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
so
and
go
like
ahead.
it's not it doesn't have to be as serious as we make it. And also like as you get older, like your sex should hopefully like get better. Like God, I don't want to go back to like what I was doing at 15.
Yeah, Jesus Christ,
Like
my sex life is so
hopefully
much
by
better the
30
older
you're
I get.
doing much better than that. So
Yeah.
it's like even if you are like a late bloomer and like you're starting later, like you also know more about your body, you know about the person more of that you're with, and like hopefully they have like some more emotional maturity. Like there's still plenty of years to have good sex.
Yeah.
And plenty of 15-year-olds are having horrible sex. So nobody should want to go back to that.
Right. Well, I mean, play is part of our mammalian ancestry, right? Like all sorts of mammals use play to develop skills and to form social bonds. But a lot of that play in nature has an element of danger to it. Whether it is dogs wrestling in a way that, to the untrained observer looks really violent, or whether it's like kittens practicing on a half-dead rodent that their mother has dropped off for them to try and like learn that skill.
Precious.
There's just a element, I think, of transgressiveness, I think, in a number of forms of play. It's sort of a way of dealing with our fears. I mean, what can you tell us about maybe that transgressive nature of play?
Yeah. Well, and that's something that can come out in play therapy, like especially with younger kids. Like when we're younger, we don't have like the language to talk about feelings or things that like we're fearful of than like when we're an adult, obviously, because we like learn more about ourselves and like different vocabulary and emotions and feelings and whatnot. And like a full like play therapy room setup, like you're going to have guns, you're going to have handcuffs, you're not just going to have like dolls and like a fake kitchen. You're going to have like things that could also bring out some like other issues.
Something provocative.
Yes. And for like younger kids who've like experienced trauma, like reenacting what they've been through in a safe environment can be a way of like rewiring like those places in our brain of like not every place in the world is going to be unsafe. Like I can like rewrite this like scene that I've had in my head of like, God, I don't want to like say something like something that horrible that happened, and I can reenact it in this very safe place with a safe person, and that can like not everything is going to feel like a trigger after that, because like it's now have like a different.
We've recontextualized it, extinguished that traumatic response a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean that can be the same thing with like adults too. Like if you're into like BDSM play, age play, whatever, like there's like an inherent dangerousness with that. And like for people who've experienced like sexual assault or sexual abuse, not everybody, because everyone like heals differently, but for some people re-experiencing that can be a way of like recontextualizing and reframing what has happened to them. And it's not a matter of like continuing to like cut that wound open and like rehashing like that same thing over and over again. It's just about creating like a different memory, so like the traumatic one isn't the one that's always the first one that comes up.
Yeah, releasing some of that, for lack of a better word, traumatic energy from that initial experience that wasn't able to be properly expressed. Now we have a safe fashion format for it. So, I mean, this may seem like a really obvious question, but I think it's important nonetheless. Can you talk to us a little bit about what separates something like murder, rape, and abuse from things like playing cops and robbers or consensual non-consent or some of the BDSM pieces you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, like it always comes down to like the consent and like what's the intention. Like kids playing cops and robbers on the playground, like the consent is that like both kids are in on the play and both of them like are wanting to play what they're playing. It becomes bullying whenever like some kid puts like plastic handcuffs on another kid and arrests them because and they weren't like initially part of the play. Like then that becomes like something different. And the same thing with like, with adult like sex play, like it depends on, because like there should be like an inherent thing of like, I want to feel good and I want the other person or persons that I'm with to feel good. Like it's not a matter of just like domineering over somebody or just submitting to someone or what have you. Like it's about like we're all engaging in this together and it all feels like in a safe environment that I can like be vulnerable and show this part of myself that I don't normally show, and like that feels good.
Yeah, there's an inherent intimacy to this kind of play. I mean, we are showing people our deep, dark thoughts. And, I guess I want to stress that sometimes those things are traumatic in the like capital T sense of this thing happened to me. And now through a form of what we might generously call like psychodrama, we are reenacting a scene where we play it out differently. But it may not be as deep as all of that. I
Yeah.
think for a lot of folks, it's when I was at a very young age, I watched a movie where this thing happened and I didn't understand it, but I had complicated feelings about it. And maybe I don't even remember watching that movie. But now here I am as an adult. And for whatever reason, I have this one weird kink or this crazy fetish. And more's the better. Like life is
Yeah.
not fun when it's purely straight. We need a couple of kinks and wrinkles in our personality to have a personality.
Yeah. When it's also like, like the reason sometimes people are into like voyeuristic sex is because it's dangerous and like that's exciting. Like, doesn't have to be like because like something bad happened to me, like this is why I do this thing. It's just like it's exciting and sexy and dangerous, and like we could get caught or like, like I'm super feminist and very like headstrong and whatever, like outside of the bedroom, but like in the bedroom, like it's fun to like be the complete opposite of that. Just
Mm-hmm.
because,
Play out our fears.
yeah, like, and it's also just because like it's just exciting and it's like something different than just doing like plain old missionary all the time.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like,
Well,
hopefully you're living a long sex life if you want, and you want to like spice things up every now and then.
mm-hmm. Well, so then ultimately, how concerned do we need to be when, for instance, our like usually kind and compassionate kiddo is obsessed with video games and wants to spend all day pretending to be a space marine, no scoping headshots, or if our like loving and caring partner fantasizes about tying us up and beating us? Like, is that something that we should feel, I don't know, cautious around, or what do you imagine a healthy framework could be?
I mean, I think it depends on like the context. Like, growing up, like, like I watched like a lot of horror movies with my dad, or I listened to a lot of his like heavy metal music. Or I like played like violent video games with him, or like watched him play. And like the difference is like the conversations you're having with your kids, right? Like making sure like your kids know like, hey, this is not real.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and having those open conversations of like, this is fake play, which can be fun. And that like this also doesn't translate to like outside of like the house in whatever context, right? Like, and like if your kid is like having like more violent thoughts or is like acting out violently, that's when like a different conversation. But if your kid is just enjoying, I don't know, playing Fortnite or whatever the kids are playing now, like, and as long as they're not going around like hitting other kids, like different.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with like your partner, right? Like depends on like the context of, that's where it's just like just being curious and asking like, okay, like what are you hoping to get out of that? Like what's made you want to do that? What are you hoping that I can get from that too? Like trying to dig a little deeper if there is something like that your partner is like interested in,
Mm-hmm.
and not
Yeah.
coming in with judgment.
This sounds so rudimentary, but I feel like it's worth saying anyway. One of the most valuable aspects of kink is that it forces sexual partners to talk to each other about sex, which is something that I feel like none of us are doing as much as we would maybe benefit from. And actually just taking this thing that is, potentially very scary, or that we might have some shame or some guilt, self-doubt around, and sharing it in an intimate setting with somebody that we love and are able to trust.
Yeah, like, and that's really like what it comes down to, is that like you're trusting the partner that you're with. Like I can show you the weirdest, grossest, dirtiest parts of me and you're gonna love me anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even if you're having like, a dom sub relationship or daddy little girl relationship, and it's not like romantic outside of that, like it's still like this intimate relationship you're having with another person, and you should like feel comfortable, talking about this shit. Because
Mm-hmm.
especially going to be incapacitated in some
Yeah.
way, like you need to trust that the other person like has good intentions. And I think like that's something that can be a little scary with like being introduced to like pornography and like BDSM when you're young and not having like conversations about it, is that like people can assume that being a domineering or dominant partner like is just about like just dominating another person, and that like it's also, and that it's not also about like making sure the person that you're with is also enjoying what's going on, and it's about like pleasuring the other person.
Yeah, no, I think that that is something that is really frequently lost in these situations. That we are, in a certain sense, like maybe working out our fears, perhaps working out our trauma in these different ways, but we are also giving ourselves and then maybe our partners permission to explore those like deep, weird, creepy, exciting, bizarre, silly, goofy pieces of ourselves. I
Mhm.
mean, do you feel that it is important to maintain a particular attitude or a particular framework? I mean, when we're talking about our kinks, or when we're talking about our sexuality, or even when we're talking about our trauma, what tone do you think we should strike?
I mean, I think the safest bet is always just like being curious, you know, being curious about yourself and being curious about the other person, of like what they're wanting to get out of the experience, or what you're wanting to get out of it. Like
Mm,
there's so much judgment about like the way we should or shouldn't be doing things, or should and shouldn't look like, and just going in with like a curiosity, like that's going to get you so much farther like with the person that you're with, rather than if you're automatically coming in with like a why, or like something that like automatically puts them on the defensive, and you're
Trying
going
to
to get
force it into a box, trying to force everything
yeah.
to justify its existence. I mean, maybe part of being playful is just a willingness to kind of let things play themselves out, kind of let a experience or an idea breathe for a little bit before forcing it to justify its existence.
Yeah. And that like nothing has to look one way. Like as
Mm,
long as everyone in the situation is enthusiastically consenting to whatever's going on, like it doesn't have to look one way. Like you can do whatever the hell that you want.
mm. Yeah, fair to say. Well, I do want to remind folks that we have lines open. We're at 512-991-9242. We would love to hear your questions, your wonderings, your existential dreaming about play and about sex, and to, you know, kind of explore this, I think, rarely talked about aspect of our humanity. And while we wait for you to give us a call, we're going to take a quick moment and see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA. Thanks for coming in and joining us, and I guess kind of helping us shake off the rust. It's been like a 3-year dry spell. So if I'm a little bit awkward, like, you know, don't. I promise this never happens.
Just kidding, folks. I'm not Bob Ross or Rob Koss or whatever. I'm objectively Dan, and I've been in costume this entire time. I fooled you guys. Can you believe it? I know.
How could you?
We will pray, we will burn, we will celebrate Jesus, and push back the forces of darkness on the year's most evil night. We are children of the light, and we will not tolerate darkness. He's gone full on super Christian for this one, hasn't he? It's amazing.
If something was to hit a bunch of people on their brain and they got aphasia, it would make sense that they were speaking to each other.
Is this
and
the
they
Three
could
Stooges
understand
argument
each
for the
other.
existence of God? When you're having a conversation with somebody about agnosticism, that you're on the same page. Right. Well, I don't see what's so hard about it. Don't get hung up on words, Patrick.
Back to the main. Look, you're right. I just.
Yeah, I know.
I like.
All right. Well, so what would you say if you are working with a client, or really, honestly, even just talking with a friend about how to recognize maybe when we're taking life a little bit too seriously, or particularly taking our sex too seriously, what does a play deficiency look like in our lives?
Ooh. I mean, I think it comes with like your life, like satisfaction, right? Like if you're taking a look and taking inventory of what your life looks like right now, like is it what you want? Like I do a lot of exploring with my clients, like if they're struggling in a job, or struggling in just life doesn't feel like what it should be. Like just taking time, and I keep saying the word curious. Somebody take a shot every time I say the word curious. Like what would your ideal life look like within reason? And I always give that caveat because it's like we're not all gonna have Jeff Bezos money. Hopefully
Yeah.
not.
So take something that feels within reach, even if it feels like a little bit of a reach, and maybe more than you even have capacity for. But let your imagination, your creativity, your curiosity actually play a part in figuring out what an ideal life would look like.
Yeah, like if you're working a job that you really hate, like what would your ideal job situation look like? Would you work only 4 days a week? And probably you do have to work. An ideal world, like none of us would work. But is it like I wouldn't have a schedule that's really strict? I'd be able to work from home, or I'd have a hybrid situation because like I need to be around people sometimes, but sometimes I don't want to get out of my pajamas when I go to work. Like just dreaming about what that ideal situation could look like. And same thing with relationships. Like if you're not getting something out of your partner that you're wanting, like is it possible that your partner can give this to you? And if not, is there a way for you to get it from somewhere else? Like within reason, again. Like if you feel like your partner's not like a very emotional person, right? Like can you get that from a friendship? Are you able to get that from a family member that like you're close with? Like is there a way to like get the things that you want, and it's all within reason? And that can be the same thing with your sex life, right? Like what would your ideal sex life look like in reason? Be like, oh, I'm having it every day. That's not realistic for most people.
Who's going to show up and offer that every day? Yeah.
We have jobs. Also, sometimes we're tired after working all day, or we just don't have the emotional capacity to do that. It's like, okay, ideally it would be at least once a week or 2 to 3 times a week. And if we were doing like, is scheduled sex okay? Can I be okay with that? And am I having the sex that I want to be having? And again, like this is not being judgmental like towards your partner, like, or towards yourself. Like it's just being like curious about like what that ideal world would look like and how close can I get to it.
Yeah, and I recognize that scheduling sex might seem very counterintuitive to this conversation that we're having about being carefree and playful and all of this. But I guess I want to say that like if you were going to have a card game at your house and have a bunch of people show up to play poker, you would need to plan that out in advance. And the truth is the day might come and you might not feel particularly playful in that moment. But you also kind of trust that once your buddies start showing up, once everybody starts hanging out at the table and the music is on and the people are drinking and having a good time, that experience of being playful is going to start to come out. People talk about scheduling sex as if it is this really weird, creepy notion. And as a sex therapist, I really have to push back on that idea because, frankly, in our modern world, if it's not on the calendar, a lot of times it's not happening. And we think that we are just going to spontaneously have this desire for our partners, when in reality, most of us are, at least in part, more responsive in our desire. And so if we don't create an environment where this is going to come up, then we're just waiting around for this spontaneity that never shows.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that also comes to the way like sex is portrayed in media, right? Like it's always like super spontaneous, and it's always like really hot and heavy, and it always looks just like this, and the woman orgasms just through penetration, and there's no other effort that's like being put in. It's like,
Yeah.
that's also just like not realistic, right? Like, we don't live inside of a movie, we don't live inside of a TV show. Like, there's other things that are going on outside of life that can make it hard to always have spontaneous sex, especially if you've got kids, family obligations, or your work schedule is off the charts wild. Like, and I think that part of that is like, can be like reframing it of like, I shouldn't have to like schedule sex when it's like, oh, like this can like help build the anticipation up for it to happen. And that can be a part of like the play of like texting your partner, like, oh, like I can't wait for tonight, or like texting the sexy photo, or whatever. That's like building the anticipation for like what's to come. Pun intended.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, we've spent like the last half hour or better, I suppose, trying to define play, but I almost feel like what we're really talking about here is more of an attitude. This conversation is more about maybe playfulness. Does that sound like a valid framework?
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be that serious.
Yeah.
It truly doesn't. Like, sex does not have to be that serious. And it shouldn't. Sometimes. But not all the time.
I mean, look, I am not trying to devalue the experience of lighting a candle on your anniversary and looking lovingly into the eyes of somebody you deeply care about. To call that frivolous, I think would be absolutely ridiculous. But also, I don't know that recreation or that silliness or that playfulness is frivolous. I mean, this feels pretty vital to a healthy and happy relationship, to a healthy and happy life. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, there's also like different kinds of sex that like you can be having, like on your anniversary sex, where like there's saxophone music playing in the background and there's rose petals everywhere. Like, that can feel like a much more like intimate and connecting moment with your partner, where maybe you take things slower, but it's like, we both work from home and like I've got 10 minutes to spare, like let's just go see what happens. Like, those are two very different like experiences that can happen, and both of them can be fulfilling in their own way.
Yeah. Well, so how do we try to cultivate this attitude of playfulness? I mean, what can we do to bring this back to our relationships?
I mean, I think that's also like having like a like attitude with like asking your partner like what they're also like wanting from your sex life. Like, what do I feel like is missing? And again, not a judgmental conversation, just being curious that like what do I also like want to be having from this relationship?
Yeah.
Or if you're having a one night stand, gasp, like going into it with an attitude of like, I'm never gonna fucking see this person again, so like I just need to like have fun. Like, if I'm never seeing this person again, it does not matter what I look like, as long as we both like want to be here, like that's what matters. And like that can be like a level of playfulness with ourselves. Like, or if like you're single, or if you're not single and like you're masturbating, like what's a way of like making that more playful, where it's like, am I just doing the same thing all the time? And like, how can I like engage differently, like with my body, to where like, it doesn't feel like so serious.
I think that's such a valuable point, especially when we are young and when we are dating. I think we all have this framework where we try to, make like a really romantic candlelit French dinner from scratch for our partner. But when we are alone, it's like whatever we can get through a window as fast and as cheap as possible. And I think we treat our sexuality the same way oftentimes. It's like, if I'm bringing a girl back to the house, then I'm going to light some candles. I'm going to put on some music. I'm going to make it nice. But if I'm just by myself, I'm going to try and rush through and just try and get that release, just try and take care of that bodily function. And I think there's real value in cultivating that same spirit of playfulness with ourselves. frankly, research shows us over and over again that when we love ourselves with intentionality, we're better able to love our partners. And I think that word love can be interpreted a lot of ways and can maybe be extrapolated out a bit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, like romance yourself, take yourself out on like a little date, like buy yourself some toys, like build up that anticipation of like, hell yes, I'm gonna rub one out tonight. I'm gonna order myself some fucking pizza. It's gonna be a great night, and I'm just by myself. Like, and that it doesn't have to go like, it doesn't have to go super fast. It doesn't have to go super slow. It can go whatever pace that you want it to be, because you don't have to care about another person in the room. It's one of the best parts about masturbation is nobody else is there.
Yeah.
I can do whatever I want. I can make whatever weird ass noises that come up. Like, I can watch whatever porn I want to watch and not be worried that people are judging me for watching like
Be
tentacle
weird,
porn
be
or
goofy, be
something.
curious, be yourself. Don't be who you're supposed to be.
Yeah, like you don't have to put on a show for anybody. Like you're alone. Like it's not a secret camera, or maybe there is. Hopefully not, or if there is, consensual.
I mean, yeah, your kink is not my kink, but your kink is okay, right?
That's not my business.
Fair enough. Well, let's jump on the phones if we can and have a conversation with Aiden in Illinois. Aiden, what's on your mind tonight?
Hi. Yes. I was listening from earlier, and I heard about how you were talking about working through childhood traumas and whatnot, the children. I came from a fundamentalist Christian family. I'm no longer religious. I'm an atheist, and I'm working through a lot of trauma. I went to a religious college and unfortunately experienced a lot of sexual abuse by a particular person there. And I find that I'm kind of enacting the same situations, and sometimes there are good outcomes, sometimes not. But I guess I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on that, like what may be beneficial for me. Not that you would be giving medical advice, just that, maybe from experience, what might help me. I've been in good relationships recently, and I'm in therapy, but I also have found myself, like I said, repeating the same cycle, I guess.
I hear that. Yeah.
Well, and maybe it's
no, please, Ashley, jump in.
Like looking at the times where it didn't play out well, and like what wasn't working about it. Like, and also paying attention to like, am I in like a headspace for this? Like if you're having a particularly like bad day, like acting those things out like could potentially not go well. That may not be like the day to do
right.
it. But if you're like in like a good place, and this feels like this could be something that I could get some enjoyment out, and like really checking in with yourself beforehand and checking in with your partner too about like where your headspace is. Because if you're going in with like carrying like the weight of the world on your back that day, like you're not going to have like a good time, and it's probably not going to feel good. And maybe there's a point of like asking yourself of like, have I played this out too much? Because that is possible, of like where we are just like doing the same thing over and over and over again,
going through the motions.
Yeah. And that like, is there a place of like where you feel like you could switch things up, or like change, like just tweak like one different thing about it where the experience could feel different?
That makes sense, because for me, like, I'm sorry.
No,
please, Aiden, I want to hear from you.
I was going to say that would make sense, because I feel like, I'm kind of like one night stands versus partners doesn't really matter. I like a certain way. I'll be honest, like I'm an engineer. I am in charge of people all day. So going home and being a submissive is really nice. But then I hit the point that like, it's kind of like during like one, I can't really name the point, and this gives me food for thought. Like I said, that I guess I hit a point, and then suddenly I'm not okay anymore. This is not fun anymore, and I'm just, as you said, going through the motions, literally and figuratively. And it, at that point, just sucks. And that's
Yeah.
not with every partner, but you know, it is a cycle that tends to reappear.
Well, and it's also okay to like take a breather, like during sex. Like if there's a moment of like where you need to like reorient your headspace of like, I'm not having a good time right now, like that doesn't mean like you have to completely stop having sex if you don't want to, but be like, hey, like I need a second to like talk this out, and I need a second to like put my head like in a different space. And like then you can like pick up sex like where you left off or in a different place, and both of those things can be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
that's
the
amazing.
important piece is that
Like,
you be present.
I just never thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I've never really thought about it like that. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. I guess I just want to stress that so much of what we're talking about really comes down to presence, mindfulness. And I might encourage you to take a look at some of the episodes we've done before on mindfulness and sex, or read a book like Better Sex Through Mindfulness. But an important piece of all of this is that if you are like working through the script the way that Ashley was saying, like doing the same thing in the same order, it can start to become chasing. You did it once, you had a good experience, you're now trying to recreate that experience, and now you're becoming so fixated on a specific outcome, and how do we get there, and how do we get there last time, how do we make sure to get there now, that the outcome starts to override the actual experience itself. And if you're feeling like you are all of a sudden kind of looking around going, how did I get here? I would wonder if it's at least in part because you were becoming sort of consumed by playing that role, by being who you were supposed to be, rather than being curious about who you are in that specific moment. Does that resonate for you at all?
It does and it doesn't. If I could say, it's actually the opposite, where again, like I grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian family, so I wasn't really exposed to sex and stuff. It was very much a puritanical. I'm shocked that we didn't have a purity like ball. But basically for me, when I was assaulted in college, it was very violent, very painful, very traumatic,
sure,
to put it succinctly. And so I think what you said, one of you may have said earlier, gosh, I don't even know, so I apologize if I'm misremembering, but about kind of reliving the trauma and trying to change the outcome. Like I feel like in that way I was and still in a form am a child, and I'm trying to work through it and maybe change the outcome of this horrible experience. And yet I'm struggling because then it's almost like my body just hits fight, flight, or freeze, and I just kind of like freeze.
Yeah.
Like it just.
And that is a real concern, because it is possible to re-traumatize ourselves, to put ourselves in a situation that looks like, feels like, smells like a experience that really hurt us. And so you do want to be at least mindful of that piece. But the meaningful distinction here, and Ashley, I'd love for you to fill in the gaps or correct me where I'm wrong. I think that the meaningful distinction is whether you feel comfortable, whether you feel safe, whether your body is operating from what I might call a neuroception of safety. And if you are experiencing this partner, this moment, as something that feels comfortable, as something that feels curious, as something that feels, dare I say, playful, rather than something that carries that same terrifying weight as that original experience. Ashley, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, well, and I think that like also goes back to like it's okay to pause sex. And I think like that's not something that's like talked about as much like with adults. Like it's okay to pause.
Absolutely.
Like
I mean, even if you just have a cramp or,
Oh, God.
somebody's going too fast or too slow or whatever else.
Yeah. Like, I'll be honest, like, I've been sexually assaulted before. And I know that, like, fight, flight, freeze feeling of, like, even if you're with, like, a partner that you feel so comfortable with, very safe, like, that feeling can still come up. And then it's like, okay, hey, like, I need a second. Like, I need to just, like, remind my body I'm in a safe place. I'm with a completely different person than what had previously happened, and this isn't the same situation. And sometimes that's part of, like, the pause is just
grounding.
reorienting ourselves. Yeah, grounding ourselves to, like, just being right here where we are. And another thought that I'm having is, like, I'm wondering if, like, maybe doing some, like, topping from below might be helpful of, like putting a different spin on it where, like, you still feel like you're kind of in, like, a submissive position, but you also have, like, power in that position, and that
To
it's
create
not
that
just,
sense of safety.
yeah, like, it's not just about being, like, a helpless participant in sex. It's like I also have, like, a sense of ownership in this experience.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And as for filling in the gaps, I apologize. You made a really good point, and it's kind of flooded my mind because I'm processing a lot of this. Yeah, I mean, I would say that, yeah, definitely, like, one night stands for me can be especially re-traumatizing. So I've actually stopped doing that, and I'm actually in a polyamorous relationship now. Which
and, like,
totally cool
one
with.
night
It works really well for me.
Yeah, like, one night stands can be fun, but they're also not for everybody. Like, I think there's this idea of, like, we have to, like, be having anonymous one night stands with people, or else we haven't had, like, a full sex life, and that's not
If I'm a
for
sex
everybody.
positive feminist, then I have to. Yeah, no, one night stands are good, but they might not be good for you, and that's totally valid.
Yeah. Like, for you, they may not be, like, an empowering experience. For you, they can be re-traumatizing. And that doesn't say anything negative about you or your sex life. That just means that you operate differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, like I said, I find, like, I have a lot of security and trust with the partner that I'm with. And I guess another, if you have other callers, please let me know and you can take them.
Sure,
But
no, I'm
I guess
excited to talk to you.
One other part is, like, I find myself in my head, like, sometimes oddly enough, like, fantasizing about the stuff that traumatized me, and it's very confusing.
Sure.
And it's in a way almost stressful. But I mean, again, as you said, taking a break is a really great thing. And I know if I told my current partner, like, hey, like, I'm not in the right headspace, like, I know, like, even if I enjoy what's happening, I'm going to feel terrible afterwards. You know, like, I don't know. That's why, like, when you were talking about working, with kids in the literal sandbox, it really resonated with me because I feel in a lot of ways that I was a child when I went through this. I did experience a bit of sexual abuse when I was a child by my own father. But, the really, I guess, other than that, the really traumatizing thing was when I went through that in college. I mean, I had broken bones and I have torn muscles that'll never heal kind of thing. So, but I find myself kind of reliving that.
Well, I hope that you know that, like, having those conflicting bodily feelings about yourself are completely normal.
Sure,
like,
yeah.
There are bodies respond sometimes without our consent. Like, sometimes our bodies and our brains just, like, don't match up, or, like, we get these intrusive thoughts and, like, they feel really stressful. And, like, I hope that you know that that's normal. Like, you are not.
Thank you.
That doesn't say anything, like, bad about you or that you wanted it or whatever. Like, bodies are just fucking complicated.
Yeah, and I know I'm oversimplifying here, but I really think it's worth just highlighting quickly that our arousal responses, whether we are talking about a erection or vaginal lubrication or our heart rate or these things, they rarely have anything to do with our judgments. You know, whether we deem something as ooh sexy, or whether we actually enjoy the thing. Those arousal responses, particularly for folks who have vaginas, are much more tied to our brain simply saying, oh, something in the neighborhood or related to the concept of sex is occurring, therefore I'm going to have that arousal response. There is a lot of great research about this, and not enough people are talking about it. So many people, particularly women, are feeling really terribly about their reaction to a traumatic experience when that reaction had nothing to do with their desire, with their consent, with their wishes. And it's just important to recognize that things like vaginal lubrication are not the same thing as emotional engagement or consent or investment in the experience. Those are bodily reactions that are largely beyond our control, and they don't indicate that you found something sexy. They just mean that part of your brain that is responsible for scanning the area for things connected to sex has been activated.
Right. Yeah, I've actually looked into some research studies about that, because there are, victims of sexual assault who, their court cases were either let off or dismissed because they experienced that, and it has nothing to do with the actual experience. And for me, like I said, I think, definitely, taking a breather, taking a moment to kind of ground would be really helpful. And it seems so simple, and yet I didn't really think about it, but that's a really great answer.
Sometimes we don't think about that stuff, and it's just helpful to have another person throw that idea out there. And it sounds like your partner that you have right now is very communicative and sensitive to what's going on with you, and that they're very compassionate, and just being open with your partner of hey, I need a second. And your partner sounds like they will be totally okay with that.
Yes, they are absolutely lovely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's given me a lot to think about and provided me some insight that's taken me years in therapy.
Hey, well, thank you. I really appreciate your bravery and sharing your story with us, and I hope you have a great night tonight.
All right, you as well. Good night.
Yeah, I guess I just want to take a moment to repeat myself very quickly and say that an orgasm is not the same thing as pleasure. An orgasm is not the same thing as consent. Neither is arousal in any of its forms.
1000%. Like I said, bodies are fucking complicated, and there's so many things that our bodies do that aren't our consent.
Yeah.
If you experience chronic pain, if you get sick, there's so many things that our bodies do we have no say over. That includes our sexual functions.
Yeah. Well, so jumping back into the conversation a little bit, are there any, exercises, habits, strategies? I mean, anything that you might recommend for us to maybe increase the amount of playfulness in our romantic life, in our relationships?
I actually got this from my own therapist. Shout out to Jessica. I doubt she's here, but if she is, is that especially when I've had a hard time with my partner. Hello, Michael. I know you're listening. If we've had a big fight, right? If we've had a week where we've just been really working in our own headspaces and not been intentionally connecting with each other, of having a day where you're just having fun. You're not talking about the serious shit. You're not talking about your adult responsibilities. You're not talking about anything that's about bringing seriousness into the time of connection, unless you're professing your deep dying love for each other. But playing a game, we played Battleship on New Year's Eve last year, and it was so fun. And it was just about having a good time. Or doing a puzzle together, or going to an arcade, something that's just about having fun and connection with your partner, and increasing that playfulness with each other.
Mm.
Like watching something silly that you used to watch as a kid. Like we watched a Goofy movie recently together and so
Holds up.
fun.
Yeah.
Holds up. Eye to Eye is it
Still a bop.
oh my god, it's like top 5 songs. It's so good. It might be on my Spotify Wrapped because I can't stop listening to it.
Yeah.
Like find it. I also encourage like a lot of my clients like to find at least like 5 minutes like in your day where you intentionally connect with your partner. Like whether that's during lunch break or a lot of times I say like it's good to like while you're lying in bed at night, like not on your phones, like just intentionally asking like, hey, like how was your day? Or telling like a funny story or something that like you're just connecting with each other. Because I think like our lives can get so busy that we miss out on that. And like those connections can lead to like more playfulness.
Busy and action oriented. You know, I mean, as a couples therapist, I feel like whenever I say something like what you just said about, you know, make sure to take 5 minutes every day to just connect with each other, that I would almost have to follow it up with some sort of caveat and say that like, and then when you connect with each other, you don't need to walk away feeling connected. There is no like specific outcome that you have to achieve. This is a process oriented thing. Relationships are processes. And if we go into it, if we go into any of these sort of playful notions, trying to figure out like, well, how do I monetize it? How do I, you know, achieve with it? How do I chalk one up on the board to show how, the validity of the thing? We're almost interrupting that process.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to look one way. And I think like something that I've discovered like in my current relationship that like you're not always going to feel 100% connected to your partner. Like you're just not.
Yeah.
Like you're just not. Like I think we all grew up with this idea of like I always have to be in this like very loving head over heels, my head up your ass feeling towards your partner. Like, and you're just not always going to feel that way.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And that doesn't say anything negative about your relationship. Like, I think it only becomes negative if you spend most of your time feeling that way. But if like 25% of the time you're not feeling connected, but the rest of the time that you are, like, that's not something to always be worried about.
Yeah, Marshall Rosenberg of nonviolent communication fame talks a lot about how love is a complicated word because we use it to describe like an emotion and a sensation within our bodies, but our emotions are short-lived, right? Like if the stimulus doesn't maintain itself, we tend to feel an emotion anywhere from like 3 to 90 seconds. You know, you see a terrifying silhouette on the horizon, all of a sudden your heart starts racing and you freak out and you panic. And then if you notice, oh no, it's just a tree, it's just a lampstand. Okay, everything immediately calms down. And the only time that we continue to experience that emotion in an ongoing way is if, you know, we're being chased by the monster that we actually saw there. And when our partners aren't around, we still love them, but we're not necessarily going to have that like somatic experience within our bodies. And I think that because we don't do a good job of educating people around these things, because we don't do a good job of talking about these things and instead try and instill this, you know, Disney movie fantasy of what true love actually means, a lot of people walk around feeling as if there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with their relationships. And instead of trying to enjoy and build on what they have, they start to panic about what they're missing out on.
Yeah. Well, and I think like that also is part of like, especially the difference in like dating culture now of like, you know, we have these dating apps where it's like, what's the next best thing that's out there? Like, I'm with this person now, but what if there's somebody better out there?
Can I trade up?
Yeah. Can I trade up? Like, is there somebody I'm going to have more of a connection with? Is there somebody I'm going to have more of this with? Like, and sometimes, but also sometimes it's like putting the work in, like with the partner that you're already with. Like, and really taking stock and inventory of, I think that's probably redundant, stock and inventory, but for the most part, are you happy in your relationship? Like, we all have parts of our that can be like tweaked and altered, but for the most part, is this like a happy place to be? I hope that like actually makes sense for what you were saying.
No, fair to say. So, for folks who are maybe having that kind of aha moment, or are taking stock of their relationship or inventory of their sex life, are there any, books, podcasts, YouTubers, any other resources that you might point us towards?
Trying to think of like anything specific, because I think it really just comes down to like what you're interested in. Like, I recently went through a phase where I was watching a lot of dance moms. I love reality TV. I'm trash for it, and that's fine. I don't care.
Yeah.
But I found a Dance Moms podcast where two of the dance moms from Dance Moms were like rehashing the episodes. And let me tell
Dance momming on air.
Oh my God. It's one of my favorite things in the entire universe. I love it. And like, that's something that's a very niche to something that I love. And it's like a playful way of like engaging with the world. Cause I know that it's dumb. I know that there's not like any like big part that this is going to play in my life, but it's just something that I enjoy. And I think that can be same thing with books. If you're like a reader of like, I hate that the school system like picks books that like end up destroying like people's love for reading. Like, I was lucky enough that I started loving books from a young age. So like I've continued that throughout my life, but I was reading A Tale of Two Cities in sophomore year. I didn't want to read that shit in college. Like, that's not fun to read. Yeah. Like, there's so many different things that you can engage with out there, especially when it comes to reading like erotica. There's so much weird shit out there. It's amazing. You can find people who are having sex with aliens or barbarians, or they're getting stranded on some planet, and like there's like a whole book series about like all these people falling in love with aliens. Like,
I think people miss that from the outside. Like I was at Texas A&M when it came out that one of the students there had been very prolifically writing dinosaur erotica.
Amazing.
And everybody was freaking out about it, talking about how, people obsessing over sex with dinosaurs. And to that, I guess I would say, like, yeah, fuck off. People are allowed to want to have sex with dinosaurs. If that's your fantasy, like whatever, it's a fantasy. That's fine. Let's allow that to breathe. But also, I think that the vast majority of people who were enjoying those books were, finding it kind of sexy and kinky and weird. But I think also the goofiness, the bawdiness, the ridiculousness, the silliness, the playfulness of it is a feature, not a bug. And I really want to invite people to laugh at the weird sounds that happen when they're having sex, to, be willing to make jokes about their sex life and their sexuality, and not feel like everything needs to be so curated and Instagram worthy and, filmable.
Yeah. And that can be a way of like having like playfulness and silliness in the bedroom, is like, you will never believe the shit that I just read, babe. Let me read you a chapter from this book that I've been reading, or listening to it together. Or I know that there's like a subreddit that's out there where people like submit their own scripts and they ask somebody else to read it in like a really sexy voice. Like, there's so many different ways to like engage with stuff, and like there's no wrong way.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the best resource for people, is like just being curious and like, what do I like? And like, I don't care if other people agree with it or like it or cringe about it. What do I like? What turns me on? What makes me excited? And like, how can I engage with that? Because unless you tell people probably aren't going to know, unless you're blasting it on like your Instagram or your TikTok or whatever. Like, you can keep that stuff secret. Like, that can be something that's just for you and your partner or partners. If you
that
want.
Intimacy is part of the value. I mean, I definitely encourage people to talk about their weird sex stuff on Instagram or TikTok or whatever else is cool these days. But yeah, that intimacy, that like silliness, that thing that no one else gets to see. I mean, I think the healthiest couples I know all have this sort of like secret weird language that they only speak to one another. And, you're lucky as an outsider to get a glimpse of it. And it to me, it only ever shows how valuable that intimacy is.
Mhm. Like, that's the person or persons that, like, you get to share that stuff with. Like,
Mhm.
this is a part of myself that, like, I don't show to everyone, and, like, it's special because I can show it with you. Or you don't have to show it to anybody. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it can be special with yourself, right? That's part of that relationship with yourself is important too.
yeah. Like, I love reading the, like, erotica that's like, this is for, like, the most, like, effed up people, and, like, this has been banned from whatever. Because I'm like, okay, now I'm curious.
Yeah.
Is it really that bad?
Let's get weird.
Yeah, let's get weird. Not so much the alien barbarian stuff, but if that's your thing, I don't care. Like, if that's what does it for you, that's cool.
Go and find it, sure.
And it's out there. I promise you, anything that you can think of is out there.
It is out there.
It is.
Well, I mean, ultimately, do you have any other advice for people who are just trying to prioritize their health and their well-being? Maybe just a simple, perhaps not universal, but some place to get started?
I mean, like, science shows that, like, people who experience higher level of stress, like, are prone to dying earlier. Existential dread. I know. And that, like, decreasing your levels of stress, like, can help you live, like, a better and longer life. And, like, playfulness and silliness can be a part of that. And I think, like, especially if you're looking at, like, prioritizing, like, your health and your life and, like, what makes you happy is, like, again, realizing that, like, we're all going to die someday. We're all going to kick the bucket. There's at some point that none of us are going to be there. Again, existential dread. And, like, this is a time to get to do the things that, like, we wouldn't
If not now, when?
If not now, when? Like, the only person that's, like, stopping you is you, or I guess the government. I guess it depends on, like, what you're trying to do. And I think, like, prioritizing it because, like, it's important. Like, I tell my plenty of my clients this all the time. If, like, life is so short, like, it truly is. It is the hardest thing that we are going to do. And you have to find something in life that gives you joy, that has nothing to do with money, that has nothing to do with really pleasing other people. That's just something that you enjoy. Like, and it's where I've, like, kind of drawn a hard line with, like, the books that I read of, like, I don't really read for work.
I
Like,
hear that.
I read books because I love reading them. Like,
I've actually had friends in my life kind of try to hold me accountable. Like, if you haven't read at least one piece of fiction or something that has nothing to do with your career or becoming a better therapist or a better person by the next time I've seen you, and I think it's valuable for us to encourage each other in that way.
yeah, like, encourage to engage in the silly shit with your friends. Like, I have a friend that, like, throws a birthday for her cat every year, and I love it. She makes the best charcuterie boards. Like, and that's so, like, like, kind of dumb, but who cares? Like, who cares? And I think, like, that's the place of, like, prioritizing it is, like, keeping the existential dread at bay of, like, you're going to have to work, you're going to have to pay taxes, you're going to have to pay your bills, you're going to experience death and dying and grief in this life, and you need to find something that, like, engages a sense of playfulness in you. And it is so important. And again, I think as adults, like, we lose that. And I've seen plenty of adults engage with, like, Dungeons and Dragons or the Marvel universe or Disney adults, people who are super into Taylor Swift, like, stuff that, like, again, that we say, like, is cringe, but, like, fuck that. If you just enjoy it, you just enjoy it, and it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, just live your life, man. If you want to be a Disney adult, who cares?
Well, I think that is a great place to leave it for tonight. Where can people go if they want to learn more about you or about your work?
So I have a pretty limited presence online.
Okay.
But if you do want to find me, I am on Psychology Today. And I can work with people in Texas. telehealth or in person. Honestly, the best way to email me is through Psychology Today, because if you call me and I don't know your number, I will not answer. I won't.
Fair enough. So folks can find you at tiny.cc/Ashley Hogan. That's Ashley with an E. And then people can find out about us and keep up with what's going on with the ACA on our website, which is just atheist-community.org. You can email this show with sex@atheist-community, or email the ACA itself with tv@atheist-community.org. I do want to say that it was a great time last week having a live studio audience for Secular Sexuality. I've been really enjoying this new tradition of opening up the library for the last weekend of every month. For this month, and I believe next month, because of the holidays, we're changing the schedule around a little bit. So Secular Sexuality will be live in person on the 17th. The very next day, on the 18th, we've got Truth Wanted with Objectively Dan and Jamie Boone. On Sunday, we're going to have Talk Heathen with Forrest Valkai and Objectively Dan. And then AXP is going to be me and Forrest. So come and see your boy in person twice that week. We would love to get to meet you, love to just share the experience of being the atheist community of Austin and get away from the screens and the lectures and actually just be people playing together in this this crazy sandpit of a planet.
And Christy's great in person. So
well, yeah, I'm much better in person for sure. And I'll say that you can learn more about the shows and the offerings of the ACA by going to tiny.cc/AEN podcast. It's your one-stop shop for an audio-only version of each of these shows. We can keep the conversation going by meeting in the Secular Sexuality Facebook fan group, where there will be all kinds of links and conversations about everything that we're doing tonight. That's tiny.cc/FBSSG, as well as in the Atheist Community of Discord. The Atheist Community of Discord can be found at tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And of course, as always, we have merchandising, tiny.cc/merchaca, where you can find a great collection. I have to say, every month we have conversations about the different t-shirt designs and the different ideas. And this last one definitely cracked me up. So I hope that folks will take a look. Most importantly tonight, I want to take a moment to thank all of the hardworking people that help Ashley and I get on the air to bring you these conversations. There is such a huge crew, not just the folks that you see in our crew cam shots. And I want to thank all of the moderators, all of the show notes writers, but of course, these fine, hardworking folks that make us look so good. And, you know, here at the end, Ashley, I guess I just want to ask, what kind of last impressions or final thoughts would you like to leave with the audience tonight?
Ooh, I'm not sure. Like, again, I think it's, if I have anything left to say, it's just be curious. And like, you know, just really try to get in touch with like what you enjoyed as a kid. Like, I think there's so much that can be said there. And like, I was so eloquent up until now. I'm sorry, I'm ending on a horrible note.
Hey, we are embracing the curiosity. We are getting away from a expectation on the outcome and just being playful people who, you know, speak, and not everything always comes out clearly.
No.
Something. There's a metaphor there. Try not to overthink it. But I do want to just encourage everybody to light a candle, to make it special, to grab some alien erotica, and to just enjoy the experience of giving yourself a big old orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Ha ha! I got it.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.